in your Bible to Revelation chapter 1. Revelation chapter 1. And we'll go through a couple of verses here, and then I'll give you the new handouts. So Revelation chapter 1, and let's read verses 4, 5, 6, and 7. Bill? I'll grab them. You gotta get the microphones here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So we got red, yellow, blue, purple. We'll put this one down on this end because in case one of you feel like talking a lot. Oh, okay. Well, there's a few less people today, so this should be enough microphones. All right. We have a volunteer to read Revelation 1. Verse 4, 5, 6, and 7. All right, Alejandro. So Revelation 1, 4 through 7.
John, to the 7 churches in the province of Asia, grace and peace to you from him who is and who was and who is to come, and from the 7 spirits before his throne, and from Jesus Christ, who is the faithful witness, the firstborn from the dead, and the ruler of the kings of the earth. To him who loves us and has freed us from our sins by his blood, and has made us to be a kingdom and priests to serve his God and Father. To him be glory and power forever and ever. Amen. Look, he is coming with the clouds, and every eye will see him, even those who pierced him, and all the peoples of the earth will mourn because of him. So shall it be. Amen.
Okay. So I have this in a handout I'll give you here in a second. We're going to look at the ministry of Jesus and also the benefits of Jesus. And John is mentioning 3 of them. And they're all 6 of them, 3 the ministry attributes of Jesus and 3 the benefits of Jesus' ministry, and they're all there in the verses we just read. So if you'll take a few minutes at your table and work together and discuss with the people around you and try to discover what are those 3, as John is writing this here, what are the 3 descriptions of Jesus' ministry and what are the 3 benefits of Jesus' ministry. So, you can find these descriptions of Jesus and his ministry, and then because of these things, there's 3 benefits because of these. So just have a verse, and then discover what those are, and that will help us understand what the very next tool, which should be the 7th tool to interpret Revelation, this is alluding to it. up with Alejandro. Yep, making it easy. Making it easy. All right, does everybody have at least 3 of them? Give you a few more seconds here. Okay. So looks like I gave the verses on the paper, so it makes it easier to discover them. So let's start here, looking at the first one that is used to describe the ministry of Jesus. Let's see your hand if you want to give an answer. Okay. Okay. Faith, that's in verse 5. Okay. And who has a different translation? Faithful witness. Anybody have a different have their scripture word it differently? Everybody has it that way. Okay. If you we're in verse 5, and John writes, it's from Jesus Christ, the faithful witness. Now, if you were to look up in the Greek what this original word is, it's actually, if I remember correctly, it's the word martyr. So this is referring to Jesus' death, meaning he was faithful. His witness was faithful, but it was faithful to the point of death. He was faithful even to the point of death. He was so faithful in his witness. He was a faithful martyr. That's what it's. So that's why many English translations put in witness, but in the original it's referencing his death, because it's referencing him being a martyr when he was crucified. Okay? So 1 is referring to his death. All right, so who has something for number 2? Number 2, yeah. Daniel? All right, firstborn from the dead. So, to put it in another way, basically this is referring to his death, and this is referring to his resurrection. Okay, so no big surprise. You're going to see that all over the scripture, Jesus' death and Jesus' resurrection. Okay, so that's consistent. All right, and number 3, who's got something for number 3? Yeah, Erica? Okay. Okay, so he's a ruler over the kings. Okay, very good. So, now these have a direct correlation to benefit. There's benefit because Jesus does this. There are benefits because he does this. So, number 1, what's the benefit of Jesus' faithful witness to the point of dying on the cross? Yeah. Okay, so his death shows his love for us. Okay, very good. So his resurrection shows what? Okay, so we are freed. Okay, freed from sin. All right, and number 3, Daniel? Okay, so this is what it's referring to when he's a ruler over the kings. Well, who? You mean like Putin? You mean like Saddam Hussein? No, he's a ruler over, and say it again. The kings he's over are the people that he's turning into priests that we read about last time in Revelation was that 5, 8, 9, and 10? How in Revelation 5, 8, 9, and 10, his blood, through his blood, he purchased people, and he turned them into a kingdom of priests. So here again, in chapter 1, this is referring to the same thing. Those who went through Christ in me, you'll see the same pattern. If you think of the Old Testament, you think of the sanctuary. This is the courtyard where everything dies. This is the holy place where Jesus the Messiah resurrects in you. And this is the holy place. This is a pattern of the sanctuary. And you see it all around the scriptures. So in your notes there, at the bottom in your notes, you'll see what three-part process or three-part pattern is John repeating? The sanctuary. And that also happens to be at the bottom, number 7 there. This is in the 9 tools to interpret Revelation. This is tool number 7. The sanctuary gives meaning and structure to Revelation. That's tool number 7. The sanctuary gives meaning and structure to Revelation. You see it all over the Bible. It's all over the Bible. And you would fully expect that not only is it all around the Bible, it would not be a shock that God would have it in Revelation as well. So, let me hand some of these out here. These are the next papers here. Oh, yeah, please. Only 13 through 15. And then take 16 and 17, put them aside. Thank you. So as you're getting your papers there, we'll be on page 14. My wife will be handing them out here. And so you don't have to, if you want to take extra notes, you can, but what I'm talking about for the next couple of minutes will be 100% on that piece of paper. So you don't have to worry about that. So as you go through the scriptures, you're basically going to find 7 different references to the temple or the sanctuary, etc. So the first one most people think about is Moses' sanctuary in the Old Testament, how the Israelites are going through the wilderness and God told Moses to make that sanctuary and carry it around. So that's Moses' sanctuary. That's what many people think about. Exodus 25, 8 and 9. Exodus 25, verse 8 and 9. And that sanctuary the Israelites used for almost 500 years. And it was a portable tent. But even though it was a portable tent, it was very elaborate. It had about almost 3,700 pounds of gold, and it had almost 13,000 pounds of silver and almost 9,000 pounds of bronze. So it was a portable tent, but it was quite the tent. And that was the first one that many people think about. And of course, it was patterned according to Hebrews 8 and 9, Hebrews chapter 8 and Hebrews chapter 9. The pattern that Moses used was in principle patterned after the one in heaven. Now, they were killing goats and lambs and sheep and cows, and that doesn't mean God's killing animals up in heaven. Those were symbols that they were giving, pointing towards what Jesus was going to do. But according to Hebrews 8 and 9, it was based on principles and patterns in heaven. So number 3 is Solomon's temple. Of course, David wanted to get it going, but God said, no, let's have your son Solomon, so he did. It was basically a permanent structure, what we'd consider today a normal building, elaborate with big cedar, marble, granite, et cetera, et cetera. But it was about 4 4 times bigger than Moses. It was very, very, very big, not portable, and quite a grand building. Solomon had used 183,300 men 6 days a week. They rested on the Sabbath, and then the other 6 days a week, 183,300 men worked all day for 6 days, and it took them, how long did it take them? 7 years, and they finished that temple. It was quite elaborate. And as I said, it was about 4 times bigger, and that one lasted about 400 years until they decided, over time, they just lost more and more interest in God. They started getting confused in their own mind, getting a distance from God, and then even sometimes blaming God like it was God's fault for them walking away. And then that's when Babylon came in. Babylon came in and took over and destroyed their sanctuary. And then you have, after they were coming out of Babylon, then they started to build, as that prophecy says, to restore and rebuild the sanctuary. I think it was 538, 457 BC. So they started to rebuild in 457 BC, and that one lasted about 500 years. And this is many people, originally it was Zerubbabel's temple, but most people think of it as Herod's temple, because later during Jesus' day, Herod was the ruler at the time, and he was remodeling. This is the instance where Jesus walks through Jerusalem, and he says, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll rebuild it. That's when he was there at that temple. And then as you're in the Gospels, it mentions that they were remodeling the temple, just like any building today. If it's been around long enough, like even here, the building's only, about 30 years old, 32, 33 years old. But we've already repainted. We're about a month away from new carpet. So, you remodel things. Well, if your building's 400 or 500 years old, you can imagine they're going to remodel too. And so during Jesus' day, they're remodeling it. And it took them, it was a 62-year remodeling project. King Herod was remodeling this temple 46 years. And it was finished in 62 AD, but it took them 46 years to remodel it. And when Jesus was going through it, they were still remodeling it because it wasn't finished till about, like I said, 62 AD. And this is a unique time in history. This was late 60s. 67, 68, 69, etc. Rome, their leaders were never great, and they just kept getting worse and worse and worse. Someone would rule for 10 years, then it was 9, 8, and 7, 1, and like 6 months, and it was just like, oh, their neighbor's going to kill them, and their general's going to kill them, and it's like their Caesars didn't last very long because their system just kept getting more corrupt. Well, anyway, in the late 60s, they were losing leadership, they were losing money, their leaders were getting even more corrupt. And so they'd already started building today what we call the Colosseum. We're all familiar with the Colosseum, everybody's seen it on television pictures. So they were only partly, they just started building the Colosseum, but they're running out of money as a nation. And so Israel, unfortunately, were often stubborn and rebellious and a little mouthy. And it just so happened in the late 60s, was a peak where they kept getting worse. And so Rome had this unique idea. If we go over to Jerusalem, we can, militarily put them in their place. And when we put them in their place, we can take some of their stuff and solve 2 problems. Sell some of the stuff and keep building our Colosseum. So that's what they did. Even history records this. I think it was 70 AD. Jesus already prophesied to the people who trusted him years ago. Could you imagine if you're Israel thinking you're going to rule the world and thinking you were special, and then yet here comes this unique leader named Jesus who says, actually, in 70 AD, Rome will come and destroy the temple God gave you. I mean, blasphemy. God gave it to them. They're the remnant. They're going to be in charge forever. And yet he said, well, actually, no, in 70 AD, it's not going to continue. Well, the ones who trusted Jesus believed him. So in 70 AD, when Rome marched their military to Israel, they got right there, and then God basically, I'm trying to remember what happened historically. Something happened where the military stopped. Because Jesus told them, hey, when you see them outside the gates, flee. So sure enough, they got on the outskirts of town, and God had them stop for a season. And they did, and the believers all left. And then after they all left, people who didn't trust Jesus stayed. And then history says that Rome killed about 1.2 million Jewish people. And then, so they killed some of them. And then they also took some of them as slaves and sold them. And then when they got into town, they destroyed 98% of the Jewish temple. And the Jewish temple is the one where you watch television and you see the rabbis kind of going back and forth in prayer. And they get that paper and they fold it up and they put it in the wall. They call it the Wailing Wall. Or the West Wall. I had the privilege, Danielle and we had the privilege of going there in 2019 in September, right before COVID. And that wall is what's left of the original temple from centuries ago. That's the part that they weren't able to destroy. But they just toppled everything. They destroyed everything else. The part that was wood, they burned it. The part that are just huge stones, they hooked up tons of horses and animals and pulled them over and ruined the rock and broke it into powder, and you can see even a few fragments here and there where they knocked some of it over and that are still there all these years later. And so Rome certainly went in there and they did that. They destroyed it like Jesus said. They destroyed most of it. They burned a lot of it. But inside of that place, inside of that temple, there is outside in the court. You have that big that big bowl. I kind of think of it as a big breakfast bowl made of bronze, and on the inside, then they have. So here's the big altar, and this would be where they burn things, and that was made of bronze. Then they had the big bowl of water, but that was made of bronze. In here, and all this, just gold, bronze, silver, all over the place. This candlestick was one solid chunk gold, between 90 and 100 pounds. You imagine how much a 100-pound chunk of one solid gold. Just that. Table of showbread, the altar of incense, and then of course the most holy seat there. Also gold. All of this, not only is this bronze and gold, it's just extravagant everywhere. So when they went in, they destroyed everything. As I said, they killed about 1.2 million. They took some as captives, as slaves, and they sold them. They didn't want to keep them because they didn't feel they were good workers, so they just sold them as slaves. And they went in, the stuff that was valuable, they took it. And then they went and sold it, and then they can use the stuff for money. And when they got all of this stuff, and they sold it, and they sold the slaves, and they took all this money, and they went back to Rome, and they used the money to finish the Colosseum. The place where when you're partying, and it starts getting dark, oh man, it's not 2022, it was way back then. Who wants to quit partying? They didn't have light switches. You know what they had? Christians. So they'd put you up on a cross, they'd douse you with olive oil, and they'd light you on fire in the Colosseum so they could keep partying. So they destroyed the place that when it's done right, it builds people up into Christ. They took the money and they put it into the Colosseum, where humans were killed by gladiators, by animals, and especially Christians were killed and tortured. Which to me is like, how ironic. Taking stuff away from God's building to put it in another building that just messes up people. How ironic. So anyway, this was the beginning of of Zerubbabel and Herod's temple.
I do have a question, Pastor.
Yes.
Did you say, and I just didn't hear, did you say that the rebuilding of the temple, they completed the rebuild before Jesus arrived?
Oh yeah, years and years ago. It started in 457 BC.
So before, right? You said before he showed up. Right?
Yeah, like 400 and some years earlier. Yeah.
Gotcha.
457 BC is when they. 457 BC is when they, started to leave Babylon, and God says, "Hey, go back and restore and rebuild Jerusalem." So they started in 457. At least that's when they started. I don't remember the exact day when they finished it, but yeah, they'd started it, and then finished it. Of course, it was there for 400 some years before Jesus came. And when Jesus was walking around in Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, doing his ministry, this temple was in operation. And that's when he went there, and after enough years, they left God again, which is why during all that time, they weren't hardly having any dreams or prophets or useful ministers, because they didn't want to hear from God. So he's like, okay, I don't need to talk to you if you don't want to listen. And so it was a great silent period, basically until Jesus comes on the scene. And John the Baptist, etc. And this was the temple where when Jesus was walking around, he said, well, hey, in 3 days, if you destroy the temple in 3 days, I'll rebuild it. And they were like, well, it's taken all these years to remodel it. How can you do it in 3 days? And they just this is the remnant church members. They had no spiritual discernment when someone's talking about something spiritual. They just were sleeping. They had no clue. But it's amazing, though, that after he died, they remembered him saying that. Hey, you remember this Messiah trickster guy? He said in 3 days he'll rebuild it. You better put a stone over his grave. So they were very selective in their hearing. They were hearing, but they didn't like what they heard. That was the problem. Because they sure remembered after he died. Well, hey, remember what he said about 3 days? So they weren't ignorant. They just didn't like what they heard. And then that was destroyed in 70 AD by Rome. If you go to Italy today, if you go to Rome, I thought I had it in these notes. Yeah, I thought I put in these notes. I don't. Who was the leader at the time? One of the relative or the brother erected a big in Rome. It's really famous, kind of ironically for unbelief, but in Rome, Italy, there's this huge thing you can drive under and go through. Yeah, Lynn?
The Arch of Titus?
Yes. The Arch of Titus. It has inscriptions all over this thing showing every and more of what I've just been describing. And so one of them basically built this and erected this in honor of the one who went over there and conquered Israel. And so you can Google it on your fancy phones, and it's huge. And so initially they rode their chariots under there after they came back victorious of beating up, helpless religious people. And so Rome came back thinking they were quite impressive. And so this has been around since, whenever they built it all those years ago. Saying all that they killed all those people, and, they're rulers of the world, and, as typical countries do, and they take over other countries. But that's still in Rome, Italy today, bragging about basically what they did. That's still there today. And then, let's see here, is there anything else about this? Another interesting little thing. This is, where this is at, this is, in my personal opinion, probably, if you are into real estate, this probably is the most expensive real estate in the entire world right here, probably. I was in Seattle, it's more than here. California's high, Hawaii's high, New York's high. My guess would be this would be the most expensive place in the earth. Because you have a majority of the main religious people in the earth think this literal literal piece of property, they think this is the place that is the most holy on the entire earth.
So let me ask you, so do you mean that where the temple once was? that's still
Exactly,
there?
exactly.
That whole area there?
100%. So if we were to, for example, pretend this is a sanctuary, pretend this is the only way in, this is the gate right here. And then you got the sides. So this would be the only way in. Here's the side, and here would be the courtyard. Here's the holy place. There's the most holy place. This literal piece of property right here is considered by them the most holy on the earth. Meaning, this is the thought anyway, this is the assumption where Abraham was told by God to sacrifice his son. They think on that literal spot. And Danielle and I were close to it. There's literally underneath, now it's been unearthed, there's literally, I don't remember exactly where, but I think probably here, there's a rock, a literal rock. And they think that's the place where they were, Abraham was going to sacrifice his son. Well, of course, if that's the place, of course the Jews are like, this is the most holy place on the earth. Well, as you go through time, Jewish people controlled it. As you go through the Dark Ages, then the Christians took it over, then the Catholics took it over, then the Muslims took it over. And depending on what era of history you go through, a different religious group killed people and took the property. And that's where you get the Crusades, the First Crusade, Second Crusade, the Third, the Fourth. It's like, oh, you're killing everybody thinking you're doing God a favor over this piece of property. And now currently, this literally, and Danielle and I were like right on the outside of the wall. We had a friend that got in because his dad was Muslim, and they only let Muslims in there because this literal place now, if you go, yeah, the western wall is still there, and you can still go around most of it. But this literal place, this literal spot right here, this literal spot right here is now under the control of Muslims. And you cannot go in there unless you're Muslim. And they got bodyguards right outside. And this is the Muslims' second most important Muslim mosque on earth, Dome of the Rock. And if you look at the picture at the very top, it's rounded and it's like painted gold. And here you can't go in, but we had a friend his dad was Muslim and then converted to Christianity, but when he was still a Muslim, he named his son, I guess Muhammad has like 100 different names, and he named his son one of those names. So when he went there, he said, oh, my name is blah, blah, blah. They said, oh, yeah. And he looks Muslim. And so they let him in. He went in and looked. But anyway, but you're not supposed to go in there unless you're a guy, a male, and Jewish. Muslim. Only Muslim, special Muslim males can go in there because it's so in that space. Yeah, because it's now Muslim. And it's like, you girls cannot get in there. If you're not Muslim, you can't get in there. If you're not special, you can. It's very, because none of this exists now because it was destroyed. And if you're looking for the most special place on earth for Muslims, and there's over 1 million of them, it's this. If you want the most special place for Jewish people, it's this. If you want the most special place for Catholics, it's this. And I say this in kindness and sincerity, if your biblical theology is, find the nicest way to put this, the majority of Christianity thinks this is the most special spot. And which is why it's another topic for another day, but majority of Protestants and Catholics think at the end of the world, they have a different understanding on Babylon that you just did your Bible study in the last couple of weeks. Their understanding is very different. Their understanding is Revelation is literal. And their understanding of Babylon is very different. Their understanding of Babylon is it'll happen right here, literally. And there'll be tanks and guns and bullets and etc. So you can imagine if you have the majority of the religious world fighting over the same piece of property, thinking they're doing God a favor. What a hot little spot that is. And when we were there, there's numerous buildings. You can just see us bullet holes here and there. It's just like, oh my word. Everybody trying to hurt each other, thinking they're doing God a favor on this literally piece of property. And that this will happen in the future. Or at least people's perception. It's not literal, but that's what people's perception is. But yeah. In my personal opinion, this is why I think America sends $4 billion a year to Israel. One of the big reasons, not the only one. We like to have military people who do us favors all the time. But in my opinion, that's one of the big reasons why some people, especially the religious right, want to keep giving them so much money. Because we think it will literally happen right here. And if we literally take care of them, well, then God will take care of America. Which is, God doesn't, that's not correct theology in many areas. Yeah, Lien.
There's some beliefs that think that's where Christ is going to set foot back on this earth.
Yes, and it all plays into that. This is where the end of the world will fall apart. This is Armageddon. This is where Jesus will come back. That all, on this literal piece of property.
The Bible tells us different. It won't touch this.
Yeah, it's unfortunate how many people have died and how much money spent and how many confused people out there over misunderstanding of, Bible principles. So anyway, that's a little overview of that part of the sanctuary. So we talked about Moses' sanctuary. We talked about heaven's sanctuary. We talked about Solomon's sanctuary. This is Zerubbabel/Herod's sanctuary. Also Jesus, John chapter 2. You should have your handout in front of you now. It's page 14. At point number 5, Jesus himself is considered a temple, which I've quoted here already in John chapter 2, where Jesus said, if you destroy this temple in 3 days, I'll rise it up. He's referring to himself. Also number 6, in 1 Corinthians 6:19 and 3:16 and 13:5, an individual person is referred to as a sanctuary, an individual, don't you know that your body is the temple of God? Whether you talk about temple, sanctuary, etc., church, it's all interchangeable. That the human being, you yourself, God sees you as a type of temple. And then, of course, in 1 Peter 2, 4 and 5, that the church as a whole, as Jesus said, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, whether it's you're gathering in a prayer meeting or small group or church, professed believers as we unite together are considered a church as well. So those are the 7 kind of main references to different types of sanctuaries. There's 7 mentioned throughout the scriptures. Those are the 7. Because as you go through it, you can turn over to page 15 now in your booklet. And as you go through that, as you look at the scriptures, basically God is wanting to the same principles that God stands for, he's wanting to put in church, he's wanting to put in you, he's wanting to put in groups, etc. So that's the same principle he's trying to continue. Share his character, his role in the relationship, your role in the relationship, the benefits, etc. So on page 15 is kind of a computer-generated picture of the sanctuary there. On your far left would be the gate. It's the only way in. It'd be like your introduction, if you will, in your relationship with God. Hey, God's real. God likes you. And then part 2, as you're there at part 2, the courtyard, which is the Bible word for it's justification. And then part 3 is the holy place, or sanctification. Part 4 is the most holy place, and the theological word people use there is glorification. So, now we get to the fun part here. Enough of the overview. So here's why I'm bringing it up. So I don't think I gave you page 16. Nope. So I will in a second here. But if you'll draw a little chart on the back of one of your papers, And so on the back of your paper, if you want to draw a chart with 4 boxes going from left to right. And then 5 up and down. So I'll give you an example here. 4 boxes across as wide as you can, and then 5 up and down. So like this. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4 going across. And then 5 going this way. Okay. Now, what I'll have you do, here you're going to find the furniture. Here, the Bible verses. And here, the major prophecy. And here, the room.
Hello,
So,
I'm Alexander from Cyber-Acoustics Tech Support.
as you're
Today I'm
in
going to be
the-
walking you
let's see
through
a hand
setting up
here.
speak.
What are there's only 4 pieces of furniture in the sanctuary. So if you raise your hand and let me know what one is. Anybody? Okay. Or no, in the sanctuary, not the courtyard, actually in the sanctuary. Okay. See a table of showbread. Okay, another one.
Hello,
Yeah,
I'm
okay.
Alexander from Cyber-Acoustics Tech Support.
Okay.
Today I'm going to be walking you through setting up speakers with a 3.5mm stereo
Incense.
connection to a Windows 10 computer. So go ahead and grab your mouse and try to follow along with me.
Okay, and the last one.
Okay, let's begin. Plug the speakers into the
One that they
appropriate
make
power
Raiders of the
source.
Lost Ark about and all those other
If you are
movies.
setting up a 2.1
Yes, the Ark
three-piece
of the
speaker
Covenant.
system, plug the satellite speakers into the back of the
One of
subwoofer.
the thrones of God.
See the picture.
10 Commandments are inside of it.
Next,
etc.
plug the
Right, so these are the
3.5mm
only 4
plug from the
pieces of
speakers
furniture
into your computer's
in
audio
the
out
holy
port.
place and most holy place.
For most laptops, this will
So,
be the headphone or
in
headset port.
Revelation,
On tower computers,
find
you
out
might have a
in
green
Revelation
audio out
where
port on the back
these
of your
4
computer.
pieces are
The
mentioned.
green port is
where
often
you find
confused
them,
with the
put
blue
the
line
verses in
input
here.
port. Be sure to
And
plug the
then
3.5
each one
millimeter
of
stereo plug
these,
into the
the
green
candlestick
audio
is
out port.
connected to a major prophecy.
Next, turn the speakers on and make sure the volume is turned up to about 50%
So
on the
let's keep it
speakers.
simple. How
Do
many
not turn the
pieces of
speakers
furniture
to
are
full
there? Let's see
volume
a
at this
hand. I
time.
know this is super trivial, but
Now,
it
let's
can
set up
help
the
you.
speakers in your computer.
How many major pieces of
Starting
furniture?
with the
Caleb?
desktop, go down to the right-hand
4.
corner of the screen by the time and date
Each one is
and
connected
locate
to
the speaker icon.
a prophecy.
Next,
4 pieces
right-click
of
the speaker
furniture.
icon
I know Revelation's filled with prophecies,
Hover
a
above
lot of
sound
little smaller
settings,
ones, but there's
and
4
left-click
major furniture
Open Sound
pieces
Settings.
and 4 major
Now
prophecies.
you are in the sound settings window.
So connect
Now go ahead and
the
maximize the
furniture,
window.
connect the piece with the prophecy. And then tell me what room it's in. Meaning, is it in the holy place or the most holy place? Okay, does that make sense? So you already have the furniture. I'm already telling you that it's all in Revelation. You just need to find the verse where it's at, and then literally go sometimes 1 verse, sometimes 5 verses. And you'll bump into the major prophecy. And then you should already know, because you already know about the sanctuary, you should already know where these pieces of furniture go in which room. So you already know that without looking in Revelation. So all you got to do is find the Bible verse and a prophecy it's connected to. And work together. It'll help you out. Now, another thing that can help you is as you're looking at the sanctuary, I did it on purpose. The order goes like this. As you're going through the sanctuary, candlestick, table of showbread, altar of incense, Ark of the Covenant. This is the order you'll bump into them in Revelation. So don't start looking in Revelation 20 for the candlestick. The candlestick comes first.
All right, so let's
And
talk about
so-
these Logitech speakers. I have them hooked up to my
that order
computer.
be
Use them literally every day. I've been using
So
them
if you
for
have your
about 2
concordance,
years.
that helps.
Use them
Or
every day
the ones in the
on
back of your Bible are kind of small.
YouTube, whatever. I'm
Maybe-
listening to
maybe if you have
music, editing,
smartphones can
whatever I'm
help.
doing.
But,
These are the speakers I use, and
try
I've
to-
been,
this may
using
take
them
a
for a
bit
while
here, but just
now.
take
I
a few
definitely
minutes
love
and
Logitech. They make some good
discover
stuff.
these in Revelation. pull together. We can see if we can, on this last stretch here together, we can suffer together. So, let's see here. Who would like to give us this first one? Not everything, just this first little, the Bible verse to where you find the candlestick popping up for the first time. Okay. Lauren, if you want to give that to us.
Revelation 1:12.
Okay, Revelation 1:12, if you want to read that for us.
Then I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me, and on turning I saw 7 golden lampstands.
Okay. So here's basically John the disciple, John the apostle. He's there, he hears a voice, he turns around, and typically when you hear a human voice, you expect to see a human being. But when he turns around, he doesn't see a human being, he sees a candlestick. Now, as you continue through the end of chapter 1, you basically, at the end, then you basically start, as the candlestick had 7 different branches, so it starts mentioning 7 different attributes of Jesus' character, which we'll get into another day. But then you start getting into chapter 2 and 3, and what is, Lauren, what would you put here for the major prophecy? What is chapter 2 and 3 all about, if you were to put it in 2 words?
The 7 churches.
The 7 churches. Okay? That's the first major prophecy in Revelation. Now, there's a lot of stuff under it, like the literal 7 churches, but if you're encapsulated into one thing, it's known as the 7 churches. All right, and what room is that in the sanctuary?
Holy
No,
place.
the holy place, yep, okay. All right. So, we've got the candlestick as a furniture. You're going to bump into it in Revelation chapter 1, verse 12. And it's then the next thing you bump into in a major prophecy is the 7 churches. And that piece of furniture is located Revelation 4, verse 5. All right. Some people will be very thankful you found that for them. So read that out loud for everybody. Revelation 4 or 5. I love that. You've got a mic. It's on. It matches his sweater as a man who's ready.
From the throne came flashes of lightning and rumbling, and the peals of thunder, and before the throne were burning 7 torches of fire, which are the 7 spirits of God.
Okay, very good. So, as I said before, I think 3 out of the 4, there's 4 pieces of furniture. If I remember correctly, 3 out of 4 times, God through John is trying to help us not miss it. 3 out of these 4 times, if I remember correctly, he says there's flashes, there's peals, there's thunder, there's lightning. Hey, don't miss this. And most everybody you know has been missing it. And so he's saying it again. Flashes, peals, thundering, lightning. It's like 4th of July. Hey, something happening here. Because there's a major transition. So we got the piece of furniture. We have the verse. Now, to help it be more clear, if you're in the sanctuary, so we just, on the previous page, page 15, on page 15, if it helps you to have a visual, if you look on page 15 in section at the very bottom there in that sanctuary in the holy place, across from the candlestick, what's the only thing there? Across from the candlestick, the only thing there is the table of showbread. So, now if you also go to Exodus, turn over to Exodus 25:25. Exodus 25:25. And then David, when you get there, if you want to read that for us again and keep bringing it home for us. Exodus 25:25.
And you shall make for it 4 rings of gold, and fasten the rings to the 4 corners at its 4 legs. And you shall make a rim around it, a handbreadth.
You know what that's saying there, David? If you have a study Bible, you'll see at the top of verse 23, he's describing, verse 23 to verse 30 is talking about how God is telling Moses to tell the people how to make the table of showbread. So as he's making the table of showbread, he's basically saying, hey, make a border around it. So as they make the table of showbread, and then, when you're a king, you need to have a crown, and then it has this edging on your crown. Then he basically says, put the width of your hand there, and then make another border with that around it. Symbolizing this is, in a sense, one of the thrones of where the Father and Son are sitting. Now let's look at another verse here. Let's look at Exodus 40. Exodus 40, verse 24. Exodus 40, 24. And if you want to read that for us. Or 40:24. Exodus 40:24.
He placed the lampstand in the tent of meeting opposite the table on the south side of the tabernacle.
Okay, so as you connect these dots, Revelation 4:5 is the only thing across from the table of showbread is the candlestick. And so Revelation 4:5, this is the piece that he's referring to. It was where you have the 12 loaves of bread for the Israelites, but it's also here referred to as a throne as well, in a sense. Okay? So if you were going to keep reading, what's the next major prophecy that this is connected to? Not the small ones, but the major ones. Anybody in your family, whoever's. Have you got that for us, David, if you know what that is?
7 seal.
The 7 seals. Very good. Yes, the 7 seals. And the 7 seals start. So the 7 churches you'll find in Revelation 2 and 3. The 7 seals you find where? They start in Revelation 6. Okay? All right, let's find another volunteer. Where do we see the altar of incense here? Okay, Alicia?
I had a question.
Okay.
So, Revelation 4:5, I was still trying to understand it. I'm still trying to come into how that, okay, give me a second to read.
Revelation 4:5, out from the throne came flashes, peals, thunder, and lightning. And there were 7 lamps of fire burning before or in front of the throne. Well, if you're in the sanctuary, there's only one thing across from the candlestick. There's only one thing that the 7 lamps are referring to, and that's the candle. Help a little bit. But it does throw most people off because most people don't consider it a throne. But here it's referring to it as a throne. But when it's saying it's what's across from the candlestick, and there ain't nothing else across from the candlestick except this. And my understanding of the thundering lightning is basically when he's doing it, he's trying to get our attention so we don't miss it. You know, I'm not trying to be mean, but I mean, most people have missed it, and it's now 2022. He does it here again, then he does it again. He keeps doing it because it's showing transitions in the book of Revelation. And say, hey, something big's happening here. So it's kind of like, if we do something big nowadays, man, let's have some fireworks and we'll get some lights going. And this is basically what he's saying. God's saying, hey, there's thunder, peals, lightning, flashes, and it's like, hey, something's happening here. Don't miss this. Don't miss it. And yet most of even the Christian world, most don't see the significance of the ongoing principles of the sanctuary.
Lining that up, it makes me think about God when he told Moses to come to the mount.
Yeah.
And the thunderings and the lightnings and all of that.
Yep.
And what that said to the children of Israel, something big is
Yes.
going on.
God's wanting to share something. Yeah, same thing here. God's wanting to share something. Yeah. Yeah. All right, so in what room is the table of showbread in, David? Okay, very good. The holy place. All right, so you put that on the end there. All right, so who's discovered the altar of incense that hasn't raised their hand yet? Let me pick on you, Gigi. I believe you discovered it. Altar of incense. What verse did you find that in? I think you discovered that. Excellent. Revelation 8. Okay. Okay, yep, verse 3 and 4, right in that little section there. Revelation 8. We'll just do 1 through 4. Okay, and like as you typically get, so in Revelation 8, 1 through 4, the Lamb broke the seventh seal, there was silence, 7 angels were about to sound with the trumpets, verse 3 that she was highlighting, and correctly so, came and stood at the altar. Well, what kind of altar is it? The golden altar with incense and a censer, so it's like, oh, this is the altar of incense. And much incense was given to him so that he might add it to the prayers, because that's what the altar of incense is about, is intercessory prayer. And verse 4, smoke of the incense, the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints went up before God. So I mean, it's pretty clear he's talking about the altar of incense. In case you missed it, verse 5, the same thing. The angel took the censer and filled it with the fire of the altar and threw it to the earth, etc. So I mean, it's clearly what he's talking about. And what do you see in verse 5? You see peals, thundering sounds, flashes, lightning, and an earthquake. Same thing again. Don't miss this. Don't miss this. And what do you bump into? The very next verse. What's the major prophecy you bump into, Gigi? The 7 trumpets. Not a coincidence. Okay? I mean, literally the very next verse. All right, and what room of the sanctuary is that in? Okay, again, that's in the holy place. Okay, very good. All right, the last one, Ark of the Covenant. Who hasn't, what little group here hasn't contributed yet that would like to? Ark of the Covenant, where do we find that? Any of you at the Young Cats table back here find the Ark of the Covenant? How about you, Krista and Lien? Either of you find that one? Can't remember. Remember you guys found the earlier ones. Amy, did you find the Ark of the Covenant? Okay. Kyla's hand prophetically going up.
I got Revelation 11:19.
Okay, Revelation 11:19 is one of them. So if you want to read that for us, Revelation 11:19 is one of them.
Then God's temple in heaven was opened, and the ark of his covenant was seen within his temple. There were flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, and an earthquake, and heavy hail.
Okay, very good. All right, so that's one of them. So this one's mentioned in two places. This is Revelation 11:19. But because, as we discussed before, Revelation repeats and enlarges, he gives this in Revelation.
After this I looked, and I saw in heaven the temple, that is, the tabernacle of the covenant law, and it was opened.
Okay, so he's making it clear. He's talking about the temple. He's talking about the tabernacle, which is another way of referencing the same thing. Tabernacle, a testimony, different wording for the same thing. And then as you literally go 3 more verses, 3 whole verses, and what does he mention then? The next major prophecy, and what is that?
The 7 plagues.
The 7 plagues, yes. Okay, and the Ark of the Covenant is in what room?
The most holy place.
Yes, the most holy place. So, other than, hey, maybe you hadn't seen it, and that's kind of neat, but the significance of this is very, very important. So, for example, most of you have heard of the 4 living creatures, right? Or not? No, forget that. The 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Most of you have heard of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Most people think they're bad, right? I mean, that's what most people think. There's movies about them and songs, and most people think they're bad. Turn over to Revelation 6. Revelation 6. So Revelation 6, verse 3. Verse 4. Revelation 6:4. There's a red horse, and he went out to take peace away from people, and some people killed each other with the sword. That doesn't sound too good. How about verse 8? There's a ashen horse, and the one who sat on its name was Death, and hell was following. And authority was given, so 1/4 of the earth would be killed with the sword, and with famine and pestilence and wild beasts. Does that sound good to you? No. Yet, I would beg to differ 100%. When you're talking about the candles, let's see here. When you're talking about the table of showbread, who in 2, does everybody, we can all have a little different words, way wording it, but I mean, we all kind of agree with how she worded it. That's the table of showbread. That's the 7 seals. When you're bowling, we've been bowling before. Most of us aren't any good. Most don't go that often, but years ago we went a couple of times. I know, some church function or something. It was years ago when our kids were even smaller than they are now. And, the bowling balls are heavy, especially if the kids are little. And so, I don't know, what was Isaiah 4 or 3 or something. He was just a little squirt. And so if you're little, well, you can do it for the big people too if you want. They always have the gutters. They got the gutters and then the wood. And it's like there's just this honing device. The ball goes to the gutters. And so it's even more discouraging for the little kids if they can flip this button and put up these guardrails so it's impossible to go in the gutters. And so when we did that, and Isaiah was like 3 or 4, the ball like this, and boom, and the thing just drops and it slows. Anyway, so we flipped up the guardrails so the ball could not go in the ditch because they kept. So you're forced. I can only go. Oh, I'm very sorry. You can only go so far. If we got to pray for Pastor Marc. I'm kind of getting. Oh, you're there to help me. Well, now they're here to help me. If you're surrounded by caring Christian people, they'll help you so you don't get too far off. That's what guardrails do. When you're studying in the book of Revelation, how do you know if you're off in the wilderness? Lots of people hear from God, Every year we're going to get more and more people who think they hear from God, but they're on a wilderness journey of one. Well, how do you know that's me or you? Or God has connected the furniture to the room and to the prophecy. The 7 churches are just symbols. They're talking about what's happening in the holy place, specifically about the principle of the candlestick. So if your interpretation of the 7 churches have nothing to do with biblical balanced principles about Jesus in the holy place in the context of the candlestick, your understanding would be, and you'd need to come back. If you're in the 7 seals and you see stuff that dies, oh, that can't be good, things die. It's in the holy place. That's a good place for Jesus. It has to do with what you just described. Jesus' body. That's the showbread. You got the bread there. That's for his people. That's why there's 12 of them, for all his people. And what happens to the bread? Broken. His body was broken. The bread, no one eats a whole loaf. You got to take it in pieces, then you eat it up. Same thing with Jesus' body. It had to be broken at the cross. And when he died, who died? Well, then, surprise, shouldn't be a big deal. Then in the seals, a lot of things die. Oh, all of a sudden we made it about Jesus. It's not bad and the devil all of a sudden. Imagine that. Well, how do you know you're on track? Because it has to do with the holy place. Jesus' ministry as our high priest and the table of showbread. That's why he connects these together. If your interpretation has nothing to do with these rooms or Jesus or these pieces of furniture, erase what you have in your mind. Because these prophecies are all about what Jesus is doing in his sanctuary in your brain in connection to these pieces of furniture. These are the guardrails to make sure you don't get off into theological crazy land and then think, I found something amazing. A spaceship's coming. We're all going to Venus. It's like, what's that have to do with Jesus But I feel really good about it. I thought God was telling me something. Time out. Has to do with Jesus' ministry in the sanctuary in the context of candlestick, table of showbread, altar of incense, Ark of the Covenant, all symbols of Jesus himself and what he wants to do for, in, and through people. These prophecies are just symbols that point to the same thing. So he's connected them. The same thing, remember as I said before, if you're in a certain room, let's call it a bathroom. If you're in the bathroom and someone says, man, I'm so hungry, we should make some food. Who doesn't like scrambled eggs in the bathroom? A little salt and pepper or just a little garlic on there? It's like, I don't usually fry eggs in the bathroom. Well, the room should be matching the activity. You don't go out in the front porch of your house and say, I'm just beat. I think I'm going to go out to the sidewalk and just lay down for the night. I'll see you in the morning, hon. I'm just beat. That's not right. Well, how do you know if your interpretation in Revelation is right? Jesus will guide you. These principles are the guide. And if your interpretation of the prophecy isn't measuring up with the Christ-centered principles, you need to reevaluate because they're supposed to be in line, not doing this. And that's what way too many people do. Things die in the seals. Boy, that can't be God. It is. Jesus, tons of verses. Jesus died. You'd expect it to happen to you. He's coming again. You'd expect you'd be dead to sin and selfishness for him to live in you. It's everywhere. People just aren't used to seeing it. Alicia, question? Is what you're... We can go wherever it'll help you. I gave an example in the seals, but if you'd prefer the trumpets, I could do the exact same thing in the trumpets. Okay? Okay? Yes, they do. Yes. Okay. Yep. Yep.
How is it that they are life? That's what you're saying. They are life.
Yes. Well, I'd say a couple of things. One, I won't give a 100% explanation. Sorry. The reason being is because the seals themselves, right now, if you remember, this is I'm not trying to say I can't prove what I'm saying, but at some point, everybody has something to make up their own mind, even if I taught for 12 years. Jesus taught for years, and everyone's like, you're nuts, let's kill him. So, so I can only do so much. But that being said, this is mainly showing you the tools and the overview and kind of how Revelation is mapped out, is in, the blueprint. The 7 seals is an entire 12-week study just itself. and so is the 7, trumpets. I mean, it's an entire 3-month, 12-hour, just like what we're doing here. You take the same amount to do just one of these. And so I'm not though I do it some, and I as years go, I do it more and more, but I try not to just give all the answers, for better or for worse. Jesus always asked answers. They beg him, tell us. He's like, well, let me ask you a question. So I try to stick to what he did. But all I can say is a few things. One, you've been through it, the Christ in me study. It's the sanctuary. The gate, Jesus says, I like you. The courtyard, Jesus says, hey, I like you so much, I'm going to get rid of what hurts you most. Biblically speaking, what hurts us most? Self. Me, myself, and I. Hence, what happens here? A lot of stuff dies. And why is that? Because there's a lot of sinful, selfish people who are 99.99% filled with me, myself, and I. And I'm talking about people that sit in churches, not atheists or agnostics. Who is the people that killed the Messiah? Church people, because they were selfish and they didn't like Jesus. Well, that ain't good. Revelation 3, because it starts with the churches. God bumps into people, and what does he say in Revelation chapter 3, Laodicea? You've heard it all your lives. Revelation, Laodicea, it's the church at the end of the world, and they're naked, and their characters are terrible, and God says, hey, get a character refined in me, because the end of the world's coming. I'll knock on your door. Will you let me in? You're not in a good condition. Well, that's just a symbol of saying the same thing. You're filled with sin and selfishness and morals and ethics and you and churchiness, but not Jesus. It's not a coincidence then. Well, what happens with that group of people? They come here. Well, if they've got a problem, Jesus cares enough to solve it, which is why most everything in the seals die. He's like, hey, we need to get rid of that so you actually can, like it says in Revelation 3, have your character refined through the fire so it comes out like gold. You think you're amazing, but you're actually naked. How about let me help you die to sin so you actually can be in a good place? When you are, not everybody does, but when you are, then those people progress onto the trumpets. And then Jesus is now living in them, and they have a little trumpet message to blow out their horn and to share with other people. That Jesus died for them and now resurrected in them, and they can now share the message of Jesus. Why? Because the end of the world will happen soon. Boom, boom, boom. And the only people that tell Jesus yes are the ones who get to go all the way through and be those representatives and share that message. All you have to do is say yes. If you say no, then you don't have to. God doesn't force anybody to say yes. And so that's the overview. Which is why I said in the very beginning, it would be helpful to go through Christ in me because the symbols are the same. Because in Revelation, most everything dies. And if you've not been through that and you don't grasp it and you don't honestly, it's not about me trying to convince you. If you in your own mind, when you go home driving home, if you think, oh, he's crazy, then you're going to have a roadblock. But in your own mind, regardless of me, in your own mind, if you think, yeah, as you went through Christ in me, if you're like, yeah, that's biblical. Revelation is the same. It just uses different symbolic words. Hence, which is why in the seals so much dies. Which is why in seal number 1, he comes out with the sword to conquer and conquering and stuff's dying. Well, why does he have the crown? Because it's his victory and he shares it. You say, well, where's hope? Because whoever dies, he shares that crown with them. His victory, he gives them, to them, etc. Any other questions as we continue? Does that help some, Alicia? At least some? Yes. Okay. And for better or for worse, as I said before, we won't get into it in this seminar, but for better or for worse, in the seals, one of the biggest prophecies in the seals is to your denomination. As I said before, there's at least 2 major prophecies in Revelation to your denomination, and the seals is one of them. And it's mostly not good news. It's mostly not good news. So, let's see here. Any other? Oh, let me show you something else here. So, go over to Revelation 20. Revelation 20. And we'll end on this unless there's another major question. Revelation 20. And let's see here. You've been a superstar today. Why don't you read that for us? You want to hand that red hot mic down to King David here, and he can read Revelation 20, verse 1 and 2.
Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, holding in his hand the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain, and he seized the dragon, the ancient serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for thousands of years.
So, if you remember back in the Old Testament, say Leviticus 16, 8 through 10, as well as Matthew 25, 41, the Old Testament is clear how you'd go through a whole year and people would come to God's temple, and they'd come there in faith, believing that the animals were a sign of what the Messiah would do someday. And just like today, some people back then got it more and some people got it less. But the principle was, just as they killed the animals, it was a symbol that Jesus would die for them. And some people understood it more, some less, just like today. So they'd go there in faith and then leave with a clean conscience, knowing, somehow my God's going to take care of it. That is so nice. And they would just leave. And at the end of the year, they call it Yom Kippur or Day of Atonement, or most people today would just call it the judgment, as it was once a year. And on that day, it was very serious. They're like, man, who's going to make it? August was rough. It's like, man, I'm just trusting that God said he'd take care of me. I'm going to believe him. And they'd have those 2 animals. One was symbolic of Jesus. One was symbolic of Satan. And then all the sins that were put in the sanctuary were reversed. And then they basically, when it's all said and done, they'd lay hands on that one animal that was like a symbol of the scapegoat, kind of symbolizing Satan, and they'd let it off in the wilderness, just assuming that, God would, take care of it. And then, but on this Day of Atonement and this Day of Judgment, when everything was happening, what did they do with that animal that was symbolic of Satan? Anybody remember what they do with it before they let it loose? While it was just sitting there waiting all day for the stuff to get finished. They tied it up, just like what he read in Revelation. As you go through Revelation, Revelation is organized around the sanctuary, furniture, or in the holy place, because it has to do with Jesus' high ministry in this room, doing this activity in and through us. Which is why these things are not separated from Jesus and this room. Theologically, it's called sanctification, which means Jesus Christ in me, his thoughts, his feelings, his actions, his motives in my brain. And last time I checked, bad, scary things that happen in the seals where people die, if Jesus is putting himself in me, that must be good. That must be good. So the Revelation, you start going, what's he doing in the holy place? And what's he wanting to do in the judgment, in the most holy? And at the end of the sanctuary, Old Testament or New, or even Revelation, Satan's tied up, just like in the Old Testament when you're dealing with the sanctuary. Because the same principles are there. Same mirror. Which one? Oh, the Ark of the Covenant? Oh, so what happens in the Ark of the Covenant, the most holy place? Let's see here. David. And I already said it. Most people think of the holy place as Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. So what, if you were to put in one simple sentence, what do most people think of in that? Judgment. Now, it's not always the easiest thing, and I realize it's not perfect, but if you were to think of the judgment, what does the average human being, if you were to guess, not trying to put people in boxes, but if you were to guess, what do you think most people would think of if they thought of the judgment? Something terrible. Thank you, Lien. Something terrible. Okay, separating believers from unbelievers. Like Lien said, a lot of people are scared, whether you're in church or out, especially when you dust away all the silly excuses and you get down to the raw, you turn the light on them and it gets hot. It's like, are we alone? Can I be honest? They'd be like, well, it is the judgment, and can I sit? And people usually get a little nervous, which we'll get into that in the coming weeks, what this is really supposed to be about. But this is the kind of stuff that most people think about. And so that's a glimpse of some of what's coming. So questions on this, relevant questions to this before we close in prayer? So it's kind of combined with, as I said, I think it's principle number 7, Revelation is organized around the sanctuary. And it also helps understand, because another principle, I don't remember if it's 5 or 6, Revelation, one of the principles is concepts and ideas repeat and enlarge. Well, one idea is, how do I know when it's a new idea or it's an old idea that they're just giving me more details on? Well, one way to know is this. Depending on, am I in this section? Am I in this section? John kind of helps you know, okay, we're talking about another prophecy now. We're talking about so it helps organize it. Just like I said maybe a month ago, how are you going to know if we're eating or sleeping or watching television? Well, what furniture's in your room? Is it a sink or a toilet or a bed? Or same thing here. Well, what are we talking about? Well, what furniture do you see? Dictates what he's wanting to teach, what principle he's wanting to bring home in that prophecy. These pieces of furniture, there's not an accident. He talked about the candlestick, and then boom, 3 verses later, it's the 7 churches. Probably an accident. God doesn't work that way. Gigi discovered Altar of Incense. The very next verse, it's the 7 trumpets. It wasn't an accident. If he wanted the Altar of Incense to be connected to the plagues, he would have done it. So he's connected these things for a reason, because this helps interpret and guide and keep us on track when we're trying to interpret it. Yep. Yes. Yep.
So would you also make that statement in the that is organized around the same church? Did you say that again?
Yeah, you still see some of that. They're organized differently, but you still see some of that. There's a lot more history in Daniel, but you still see some of that. You still see the Ancient of Days, in the Holy of Holies, and he judges on behalf of the saints. So way back in Daniel, even before Jesus died and resurrected, or was even walking around as a human, back in Daniel, it already said, God already told us what the victory was. And yet now, over, I'm not remembering the exact math, well over 2,000 years later, there's still people that we know that still aren't sure what God would say about us, if he's going to take us or if he likes us. Except way back in Daniel, over 2,000 years ago, it's already clear. God judges in favor. And yet there's people that are still in lots of churches that are just, man, I don't know. I mean, God knows. I mean, you going to give him a different answer than, who's ever been to court and then the judge says, no, we're gonna let this one slide. No, judge, I'm a little more just than you are. You need to fine me. I know you're gonna let this ticket slide, but I cannot leave till I pay somebody some money. Are you insane? Yet most churches that anybody goes to on the earth have churches filled with people like that, where God already over 2,000 years ago gave us the answer. And we have churches, even our own denomination, filled with people who are like, I don't know, I think I probably really should pay somebody somewhere. Just like atheists would just say, are you insane? If you get a ticket and you go to the judge, are you going to tell him, hey, I got to give you $200 before I leave or I don't feel right? It's just like, what are we thinking? We got churches with people sitting there thinking the same thing. I don't mean in a mean way. My heart breaks that people just still don't trust God when he already gave us the answer. But we can go to a human being who's atheist in a court and he'll say, okay, this is what we're going to do. And we say, okay. When God says the same thing, we're like, well, I don't know. It shouldn't be that complicated. Yes. So you've already got 7 of the 9 tools. We're practicing some of it. So we've already done the interpreted Babylon in principle and 24 elders. And then the next couple of weeks we'll also do the first seal. And then we'll continue the kind of the overview of Revelation, kind of how it's structured and organized. Yes. Later we can go through the 7 churches and 7 seals, yeah. But I'm not moving tomorrow, but what we're doing will take at least 12, 13 weeks. And then once we're done, we can take a little break and then come back and say, hey, whoever, because I didn't say I would do that, so I don't want to, because literally the 7 seals take another 12, 13 weeks. We'll get there, but I'm going to finish this one first, yeah. Yeah. Any other question as we close? But if you're thinking big picture, basically, the Christ in me study is Revelation. Revelation just puts television, a dream, whatever. God finds a way to bump into you and says, hey, I'm real. I kind of think you're okay. I could make just life even better, more balanced, more happy, more peaceful. You don't have to hurt yourself so much. You don't have to hurt everybody else so much. I can make you live forever if you believe that person that we call Jesus, God. If you believe the person, if you think they're real, if you like that idea, then he says, great, let's hang out. Kindergartners at school do that. It's my first year at kindergarten. I just came home and Bob was there. We just played trucks. People meet new people all the time and have new relationships. That's Jesus. People who like that go to the next step. He says, I'll get rid of what hurts you most. What's that? Me. What's that for you? You. How about you? You. For everybody, our worst enemy is ourselves. Jesus, hey, good news, bad news. Bad news is you're a train wreck. And you've been lied to most of your life by lots of people, including people at church. Oh, you're okay. No, you're all extremely toxic. You hurt yourself a lot and everybody you're around. But the good news is Jesus is better than your toxicness. And at the cross, he's already taken care of it. If you trust him and appreciate it, and he'll just be stuffing that in you little bits every day if you let him. And we call that Jesus' resurrection, because he'll now live in you. And at the pace that you trust him, he'll give you his thoughts, feelings, actions, and motives, so you don't hurt yourself so much or other people. And then when he comes again, you guys already know each other, everything's cool, and so you just start floating up to heaven. That's life, that's Bible. That's Revelation, just through symbols. 7 churches, hey, you're a mess. I've got this against you. If you don't come to Jesus and let him clean it up, I'm going to take your candlestick. It's the churches. But I got a solution. If you let Jesus die for, it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt. If you don't think it does, go to hospice, go to the hospital, go places where you see people die. Death is painful, but Jesus will help you die to self. That's the seals. But if you accept it, you get sealed into Christ, and he will, sorry for the really conservative people, he will put a tattoo on you called Jesus. So permanent, you never have to go get that tattoo colored, nothing. Nothing will take that tattoo off. You'll be sealed in Jesus' death. And the gift he gives you is his resurrected life, so that he'll be living in you. Death couldn't separate you from Jesus. What's it Revelation say? They were threatened with death, and they didn't care. I will not stop bleeding for Jesus. You got to kill me. I will not stop with Jesus. If you get around me, he's going to rub off on you. If you're uncomfortable with that, you might want, I got a gun. I don't care. The Apostle Paul was so against Jesus, he was killing people in Jesus, and you know what happened? It rubbed off on him. And Paul spent the rest of his life in every penny bleeding Jesus. And if Jesus is in you, you will do that to the day you die. We just call it the trumpets. Jesus is coming again. He will get people off that fence. People who like him will love him. And the people who don't like him, they will hate him. Ooh, he's a problem. We call that the plagues. And he comes back again. It's Revelation, just in symbolic form. Because we're not used to Jesus, and we're also not used to this. And so most people miss it. But I mean, that's it in a simple nutshell interpreted. It's all Jesus. Yeah, and he comes back. All right, let's close in prayer. Oh, before I forget, no study next week. I'm going to be down at the Spanish-Mexican border giving some seminars, so I won't be here next Saturday. We kind of have a member giving the sermon and also a guest we're trying to do a tag team. God still does miracles. There was somebody that literally was here down, paralyzed, nothing. And that for 9 years, I don't remember, a long time. And anyway, God said, hey, I'm greatly paraphrasing, but basically, I'm going to do a miracle and you're going to walk. And he's like, what? His wife was even like, oh, come on. Anyway, and he was in his garage one day and his wheelchair wasn't working or something or other. And God said, well, just get up and get it. Lord, you say the craziest stuff. No. Get up and get it. He did, and he's walking today. Anyway, so we're hoping to have him here next week. He lives in the area. God still does amazing stuff. Before he comes back, didn't he say he would do dreams and visions and miracles? And I mean, imagine that. Anyway, so we're hoping to have that person here next week. while I'm down in the Mexican border giving some seminars. So I won't be here doing this, so there'll be no food and no revelation next week. So, all right, let's close in prayer. Oh, and before you leave, I got some more handouts. What we just bled over, I got some of the answers, so I'll give them to you here. All right, Father in heaven, thank you for being the world's best communicator. I know we went a little overtime today. Continue to bless us more and more and more. Continue to help us to hear, not me, help us to hear you. Help us to hear the scriptures. Help us to continue to have our just entire being packed with you in balanced, normal, wonderful ways. Help us to hear scriptures and to hear you and not to be led astray, and just continue to guide us as you see fit. And we ask it in Jesus' generous name. Amen.